Hey guys, so today we're going to be discussing food as building blocks to muscle.
So, first, we're going to dive into macronutrients. So, macronutrients are nutrients that the body needs in large amounts to provide energy. So, those are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. As you can see, carbs are the main source of energy and are broken down into glucose to then be broken further down and used for ATP. Fats are another great source of energy, important for cell structure. They protect your organs, absorb, and help you to absorb fat-soluble vitamins. There are some examples such as oils, butter, nuts, and then proteins are essential for building or repairing tissue. I'm sure you've heard that amino acids are the building blocks of muscles, and they play a role in enzyme and hormone production. Some examples are, chicken, fish, eggs, beans, etc. Now that we've had a very quick overview of the macronutrients, we're going to dive into the digestion and absorption process for each of these, starting with carbohydrates, the orange column. Carbs digestion will start in the mouth with the enzyme amylase, which is going to break down carbs into simple sugars. That process will continue into the small intestine, where enzymes will further break down sugars into glucose. Glucose is going to be absorbed through the small intestine and into the bloodstream. There it can be transported to cells. There at the cells, the glucose can go through a process called glycolysis, which will turn the glucose into ATP to be used as energy for the body. Next, we're going to discuss fats, this green middle column. So, fat digestion process will begin in the small intestine. Bile will help emulsify fats and enzymes from the pancreas, which will break down the fats into fatty acids and glycerol. The fatty acids and glycerol then will be absorbed into the small intestine before they enter the bloodstream. Lastly, we're going to discuss protein here. So, proteins digestion process will start in the stomach, where the acid and enzymes like pepsin will break down the proteins. Another word for this is denaturization. So it goes through a denaturization process, which breaks the protein into small peptides. Further digestion will then occur in the small intestine with some help of enzymes from the pancreas, turning the peptides into amino acids. This image is a great tool to use to further explain protein digestion. So, like we just talked about, the protein starts at okay, can you see my clicker now? The protein starts in this like balled up form, and we just discussed the denaturization process, which is this unwinding process that you can see right here. And because of the enzyme pepsin, that is going to occur. And so that is kind of the beginning process of this protein digestion. And then as you get into the small intestine, we're going to break down the protein into amino acids and peptides. Those amino acids will then be absorbed into the capillaries, where they can then go into the bloodstream and travel throughout the body wherever they are needed. So this is a biochemical pathway map, and it shows the different macronutrients and molecules that are metabolized in the body, focusing on the relationships of carbs, fats, and proteins. This also has alcohol metabolism on there, but we won't be looking at that. So there's a few things that I want to get your attention on. So carbs are going to start up here in the form of either glycogen or glucose, and they're going to go through that process that we discussed earlier of glycolysis to break down into pyruvate. Fats are going to start up here, and they're either going to break down to fatty acids or to glycerol. And then protein is going to start down here and will break down into amino acids like we discussed earlier. So the overall goal of this biochemical pathway is to either break down the macronutrients into pyruvate, acetyl-CoA, or some sort of intermediate that can go in between to end up in the citric acid cycle. So once in the citric acid cycle, the electrons will be created and can then go to the electron transport chain, which will then be able to make ATP to be used as energy for the body.
So the whole goal of this is to create ATP and have energy for the body. So another thing to note is that these pathways work to break down the macronutrients, but they also can work in reverse depending on the body's needs at a certain point in time. Another thing, we've talked a lot about protein and amino acids, so I just want to point out that there's actually several different ways that amino acids can enter, whether that be through converting into pyruvate or acetyl-CoA, or depending on the amino acid and the structure itself, it can be a direct intermediate right into the citric acid cycle. So these are all just important things to know and understand as we kind of keep going in this. Yes. So we've talked a lot about proteins and about how they digest, absorb, and other metabolic pathways. But let's talk a little more about why that is and why there's a difference in metabolic pathways with carbs and fats and proteins. So carbs are going to be made up of carbon and water. Fats are going to be made up of carbon, hydrogen, and some oxygen. So this right here is an example of a broken down protein and amino acid. So as you can see, there's a nitrogen in here that I've highlighted. So this is a very big difference compared to carbs and fats. This group right here that I'm circling is called an amine group. So proteins have to go through a process called deaminization to take off this nitrogen or this group and get rid of the nitrogen, which is going to leave you with a byproduct of urea, and then you're left with a keto acid. So this is more of a lengthy process than metabolizing carbs and fats. So usually you want to burn your carbs and fats before you're going to resort to breaking down protein for ATP, just because it's a lengthier process. You actually have to have the protein broken down to an amino acid first, then you can take the amine group off the amino acid to extract energy from the protein. So it's a very important thing to remember in the sense of creating ATP and why we would want to burn carbs and fats before we resort to proteins. But let's also look at some other functions. So one of the main jobs of protein is to build and repair muscles. I'm sure you guys have heard, amino acids are the building blocks of muscle. So we're going to be reading a lot of the research articles about that this whole semester. So proteins can also function as enzymes. They also transport and store important substances in the body. They can act as hormones. Proteins can also play a essential role in immune system function by identifying foreign invaders. And then also, as we've talked about throughout this PowerPoint, protein can be used as an energy source when needed. So one of the biggest takeaways from this slide is just to remember that proteins have a nitrogen that carbs and fats do not, and protein must go through the process of deaminization to be able to get rid of that nitrogen to then be broken down into ATP.
Next, we're going to talk about the difference in essential and non-essential amino acids. So non-essential amino acids your body can make by itself, and essential amino acids your body cannot make by itself, so you have to obtain it through your diet. So you think it's essential that you eat these amino acids. So here is a list that you can look at and reference that has the essential and non-essential amino acids. One thing that I really want you guys to look at is the 3 essential amino acids that have asterisks by them in purple. So isoleucine, leucine, and valine, those are going to be the 3 very important essential amino acids in muscle growth and muscle repair. So you are going to want to remember those because those will be coming up a lot this semester, especially in some articles that we'll be reading. Yes, so make sure you try and remember those 3.
Lastly, we're going to discuss protein's importance in exercise. So, as it pertains to building muscles, protein provides amino acids that are needed to repair the damaged muscle fibers, helping to recover and grow the muscle, also known as hypertrophy. And then essential amino acids that we just talked about, leucine, isoleucine, and valine, particularly leucine, but all 3 will play a crucial role in stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Also, we've talked a lot about protein metabolism, so obviously at this point we know that protein can be used as a source of ATP or energy, but what does that look like from an exercise standpoint? So when you exercise, your main energy is going to come from carbs and fats. However, during prolonged intense exercise, your glycogen stores are going to be depleted, so your body can break protein down into amino acids, then convert those amino acids into glucose through gluconeogenesis, or the amino acids can directly be converted into intermediates to enter the citric acid cycle, like we talked about in that biochemical pathway map earlier. So then those can be broken down into ATP. So obviously this is not going to be the first thing that you're going to use as it pertains to exercise, but if you're doing prolonged intense exercise, then protein can become a much needed source of ATP.